Hey there, I'm Betsy, and I want to talk to you today about fluency in your math classroom and why it is not memorization. So, I want you to think about the students in your class right now and remember yourself at that age. So, I can think back to third grade or so when I had a math teacher who separated students by what they felt was a good student and a not so good student, and had determined that the students who were not able to learn the way that this teacher wanted to give you the information, you went like to the back of the class and sometimes even just faced the other way. Like she just wanted nothing to do with you. That was not a very good thing at that age because now I'm definitely not going to be engaged in any kind of stuff. And I can also think of some stories that lots of people over the age of 40 like to tell us youngsters about how they had to stand around and recite their times tables to their parents, their friends, whoever would want to quiz them, right? And again, not necessarily does that equate to fluency. So I really want to take the time with you today to talk about like what does fluency mean in the math classroom? We all know the general definition of what it means, to fluently do an activity. A lot of times it's with reading or speaking. But what does it mean for your math class and the students that are struggling? So, in this podcast, Dyscalculia in the Classroom, we're going to talk about different accommodations and strategies that you can use that do not require memorization and are going to help your students who are probably in the lower quartile on their testing data, and how we can get them to engage in the classroom, how we can get them to want to do the math work, and how to help them be successful. So, when I think about fluency in the math classroom, and this is a really big standard that's written in, elementary grade levels, fluently multiply, fluently add and subtract. I want you to think about what does that look like without memorization? Because fluently doing something does not mean you can memorize your math facts. Does memorizing your math facts and your times tables make things go faster? Yeah, sometimes it does. And there are plenty of students, probably 50% or more of your students who can do that with ease. They have no problem. It's super califragilistic, expialidocious that they can do all those things. They can stand in front of whoever wants to do it, and they can do all those minute math activities that you like to do. That's great. But we're talking here in this podcast about how to help that lower quartile, the kids with low numeracy, the students that may have a learning disability. They may have what is known as dyscalculia. They may have ADD. They may have dyslexia. They might have something else. But what we do know is that in your data, they're always in the bottom quartile. And we really want to help them get better at math. So we want to think about what are we doing that is going to help them feel successful, help them feel better about their abilities, and start building in that fluency track, right? So, thinking about the conceptual part of it, the understanding of the problem, one way to think of it, when we're doing word problems, that definitely comes to mind. Do they even know what the question is asking them to do? That's something I talk to my son about all the time with homework. He's like, "Can you help me with this?" And what he's really asking is, "Can you give me the answer?" And when I say, "No, I'm not ChatGPT, I'm not just going to give you the answer," he gets so frustrated because he just wants to get to the end. He doesn't really care about it. And a lot of our students are like that, especially those lower quartile students. So, conceptually, what kind of activities are you doing that are going to help your students understand what is the question being asked, right? How much time do you spend with that part of the assignment, like just the directions itself, just the questioning part. How do you go about helping your students understand the question? That is one way to build in some fluency. Okay, making it faster to know what is the question, what do I need to answer, what am I being asked. Okay, then we have some procedural fluency. How do I get to the answer? What are the steps that I have to follow, right? Is it just one step? Is it 5 steps? What do I need to do to get to the answer? Again, this is another area of fluency, of how quickly, smoothly, efficiently do we get through the process, through all the different steps to get to the answer. So as a teacher, how much time are you spending in this area, right? Are you going through it just one time? You're putting the steps on the board and that's it. That's the only time that you talk about the procedures. Because what I really want you to do is start talking about the steps every single time. If you're going to do 3 practice problems on the board with your students as a whole group, every single time I want you to say step 1, step 2, step 3. I want you to point to it when it's on the board. I want you to make sure that Susie over there wrote it down in her notes, right? Because we want them to be able to use these notes later when they're doing their classwork or when they're at home doing their homework. If they have the steps written down in their notes and they can look at their notes while they're doing their practice assignments, right? This is after whole group. This is on your own. This is homework time. This is small group. This is share, pair, we, free, however you want to do it. You are putting in there those procedures every time, over and over and over again. Because the more that you repeat the procedures, the more that you refer to where it is in the notes, the more that you remind students that it needs to be written down, the more that you ask a student to tell you the next step. These are all ways that you're going to build fluency because they need it by repetition. Have you ever sat with a student, your own child, your niece, your nephew, whoever, the neighbor's kid? Have you ever sat and watched them play a game? They are doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over. And every time they get a little bit better. They get a little bit better every single time. They learn something new every single time. They get more fluent with the activity every single time. And that is what your class should look like. It should not be, I'm going to tell you something one time, and then you're going to do it 10 times on your own. That is not building on the fluency part. That is not teaching them how to use their strategies, not teaching them how to find the process as they're going along. So fluency is not about memorizing facts, right? If we think about methods, how we get to the answer, how do we use the algorithm? If we're doing long division, what are we talking about when we're saying, 85 divided by 7? What does that mean, right? Back to that conceptual part. You have 85 cookies and you have 7 people coming to the party. How many cookies does each person get? That's like the conceptual part of this problem. So even if you're just writing on the board 85, the little division house, the number 7, right? You want to make sure that the student is understanding the concept about the question. Like, what is intended to be understood by this thing on the board? And honestly, I think about it when I was in college and before I ever thought about being a teacher, I was going to be a veterinarian. That's where I was headed. And I was taking all kinds of fun zoology and biology classes and all great stuff. And then I hit organic chemistry. And I will remember this forever. Still, it's been at least 20 years later, maybe more now. But the teacher, the professor, went to the board, drew some lines, and then asked everybody in the class and said, what does this symbol represent as far as chemistry goes? And couple people raised their hands or whatever it was. And I just remember sitting there and I was like, that looks like a line graph. That looks like a bunch of lines. That does not look like anything related to chemistry for me. Right. So apparently it was like a symbol for, I don't know, hydrogen peroxide. Who knows what it was? Because that very day, I left that class and I went and changed my major because I knew I was not in the right place and I was never going to understand what that guy was trying to put out. And you have to think that sometimes that's what your students are thinking. They're sitting there and they're like, okay, they got some numbers up there. That's great. She's like, how many times can you put 7 into 8? Like, why is 7 trying to go into 8? Like, what is happening here? Why are we like trying to figure that out? And honestly, that's not what we're trying to figure out. We're trying to figure out how many groups of 7 cookies can we make if we have 85 total cookies? So again, fluency comes in many parts. And yes, if you memorize your math facts and your times tables, then that would be great for when you finally get to the part where you're like, okay, I don't know, 7 times 7 is 49. So it's more than 7 cookies everybody gets. And you're like, oh, 7 times 10 is 70. Yay, we're getting 10 cookies at least. Oh, wait. And, so great. Yes, if you could memorize them, awesome. That's wonderful. But that's not necessarily even half of the question. And that is not even where the fluency part comes in. That's just memorizing some facts. So as we're going through this idea of fluency, and with my specific understanding of how I want you to think about the math learning disability dyscalculia, how is it going to help your students in your class? So you can see here a couple examples, right? I have created my own resources that I use where I give the times tables list. Now I want you to notice I'm not giving them that crazy chart where they have to graph, right? Where they're going down this way and they're going this way and where does it meet? That is a whole nother conversation about why that is way too much work on the brain for a student who has low numeracy or even a math learning disability. So I want you to notice that I suggest using a times tables list like you see here. And like I've put in all my resources, which if you'd like them, let me know. But giving them this little tool, right? After they've understood what the question is asking, after they've kind of gone through any processes of how do I get to this answer, giving them this little tool, this times tables list, is now going to remove that block that they have because they've been telling themselves for at least, 3 grade levels, they don't know how to do math. They're just not math people. They can't stand in front of somebody and, spit off all the times tables list. They just don't know how to do that. So I guess they just can't divide. That's what they're telling themselves. But we know that's not true. Like if they could sit there and talk to you about the question, if they could say, there's $45 in my piggy bank. So how many groups of $2 can I make? Right? That was a weird analogy, but that's just what came up. They can conceptualize the idea. They understand what you're trying to get to as far as the problem is. But if you keep telling them that they didn't memorize their times table, so therefore they can't multiply or divide, that's what they're going to think. And that's not true. It's just not true. They were able to talk to you about the problem, right? They could tell you the procedures. They could say, I need to figure out how many groups of 2 I can make. So, here I'm going to go 2 and 2 and 2 and 2. I'm going to put dots. I'm going to put circles, whatever they do. These are all methods. These are all strategies that show you that a student understands the idea of dividing. What it also tells you is that they just can't memorize times tables. And that is dyscalculia. What it also tells you is maybe they've just told themselves they can't, memorize times tables and they just need more practice with them. And what you want to do is really get them to understand the whole dividing thing, right? So let's take apart or take away the part that says, I don't know how to do it. Give them the tool, give them the times tables list. If they can express to you the understanding of what the question is asking, and they just need a little reminder of their times tables, just give it to them. You're trying to help them become fluent. You are helping them become successful. The more times your students can feel success when they're doing the assignment, the more likely they are to engage in your classroom. The more likely they are to go home and do their homework with this tool to help them. And now they're able to understand a whole nother concept that you're trying to teach them. Please remember, as a teacher, you went into this job thinking, I'm going to help students love science. But this kid can't multiply. Oh, you just crushed them. They are now crushed and defeated. When really, they just need a little tool to help them, right? If your idea in class is to know how to track data and we need to add it up in the end, right? Like you see here in this example, let's give them a little tool to help them, to guide them through the process. So again, this is an example of how I've taken like just the top 2 rows of a hundreds chart. I've put it right on my worksheet, so they're still going to do the algorithm here. They're still going to have to carry over, right? They're still going to have to, they're not getting the full hundreds chart right away. You could give them the hundreds chart. It doesn't matter. They're still going to start at 32 and they're going to count 39 times. When you are trying to help a student who has low numeracy do addition, that idea of like jump 10, jump 10, jump 10, they just know you're going down, down, and down. They don't really understand why you're going down, down, and down. Especially if they have dyscalculia, they're going to count every single time, all of the dots, all of the squares, all of the numbers. They're going to do it every single time. Now, a student who doesn't have the learning disability, just has low numeracy, is going to count 10 all those times. And then eventually they're going to be like, oh, if I count 10, I'm just right here. If I count 10 more, I'm right here. Their mind is going to pick up that procedure of if I go down, I'm grouping it by 10. But if you just tell them, go down 10, go down 10, they're not understanding the concept. Their mind is not building it themselves. You want them to build that part themselves. That's part of the fluency. That's part of the procedure. You want to make them get it conceptually on their own. Like when you are teaching those little tricks, make sure you're teaching it in a way that starts at the very basic building process and showing them why this is helpful to jump down. Count the 10. Do it 3 times in a row. Do it 5 times in a row if you have to. The students who pick it up, the students in the top 75% quartile, the students in the top 25 percentile, they're not going to need this chart. They're not going to look at this chart. They're going to do their own thing, right? But the student that is at the bottom, hoping and praying that you are going to help them feel better about math class, is going to look at this chart and they're going to use it to the best of their abilities. They're going to say, how can I, carry over? How can I count the boxes? So giving them a tool is not saying they don't know how to do it. What you're saying is you just need a little extra time for your mind to catch up. Okay? You're just saying, here's something to remind you of what we talked about 4 days ago. We talked about place value 4 days ago. And here's the pretty little chart that we made, right? And here's the chart that is hanging on the wall. But that's really kind of far to see. You're like, it's on the wall. But maybe Susie needs glasses, but doesn't want to wear them. Because my kid doesn't wear his glasses at school, but he has them. We go to the eye doctor every year. He's like, I can see fine. Okay, great. Well, I hope that relates to how it gets on the paper. So instead of saying it's on the wall, let's say, here it is on your paper. Here it is as part of the worksheet. I just Google searched a popular website that has worksheets, found this place value one. It only had the numbers for each question. It had the little underline, but there was nothing to trigger a memory. Now, if you are a teacher who uses, little notebooks with stuff, you might say, hey, Joe, turn to the page that talks about place value in your notebook. Open up to that page. Let me come see it. I want to see that you glued in the place value chart. And I want you to keep that page open on your desk. All right? So that way, if you kind of forget what place value the number 3 is in that first question, you can look at the chart, right? It's a tool to remind you, because here we're practicing. We are practicing. We are showing our mind every single time by using the chart, by using our notes, that this is the correct process. This is what we're understanding conceptually. This is how we're going to get our mind to see the correct information every time. In order to become fluent, you have to see it, know it, understand it, build upon it. It's not about memorizing everything, because there are people who go to McDonald's all the time and they will still stand there or in the drive-thru. It drives me insane sometimes. I'm like, have you never been to McDonald's? You don't know what's on the screen? That's kind of what you're telling your students when you say, you don't remember what we did 4 days ago? How did you forget place value already? But instead, what you're going to do now, because you know better now, you're going to say, here is this chart. Remember how we looked at, the hundreds area and where it is on this question, right? So open your notebook. This is the page we want to look at. We're going to keep this page open on our desk here. We're going to put our paper right there with it, the worksheet and everything, right? You're going to use this when you're at home. When your parents say, I don't know how to do your fancy new math, you're going to be like, no worries. I got my notebook. I have my charts. I have my tools to help me practice these items, right? Remembering, fluency is not about memorizing. It is about the concepts, the process, using our tools, becoming efficient, giving our mind the proper information every single time. If every single time I practiced adding with regrouping and I just had my little hundreds chart or just the top 2 rows of the hundreds chart to help me remember, 2 plus 9, 2 plus 9, right? I can count on there. I can go through it. Great. Awesome. It's going to help the mind get that trigger. It's going to help give it the right answer every time. It's the same thing with the multiplication list, the times tables list. If every single time Peggy is over here, 8 times 6 equals 48. Great. Got it. Okay. Oh man, what is 7 times 4? I don't remember. I'm going to go to my times tables list. I'm going to look directly at 7 times 4. That equals 28. So again, I've seen it. I've said it to myself. I could say it out loud. If I'm in class and my teacher is doing one-on-one with me and she sees that I'm struggling with 4 times 8, she's going to say, can you get out your times tables list? We should have that with us all the time. Let's not forget that, because now we're going to go look for 4 times 8. You're going to look for it and you're going to tell me what is 4 times 8. And that student is going to find it. They're going to tell you the answer and you're going to be like, yay! Yeah, that's it. 4 times 8 is blah, blah, blah. And you're going to write it down. Their mind has seen it at least 3 times now, right? That is going to help build fluency. With the caveat that if a student has dyscalculia, I can tell you all about it later, but their parietal lobe is eventually going to dump it out and you're going to start over again. But that's like the bottom 10% of your class, right? 10% of your students are going to need this chart. So how many is that? 2? The rest of the class is going to eventually get away from the chart. They're not going to need it anymore, but they've had time to be successful, to feel successful, to get that confidence. They're going to love having these tools and you're going to see improvement over time. It's not going to be tomorrow. It's just like dieting. Believe me, I really wish I could just take a pill and lose 50 pounds in a week, but it doesn't happen. Even if I took that special fancy pill, it still takes more than a week. So keep in mind, these are tools, these are strategies, these are helping to build that fluency through concepts, procedures, and just having success, being successful. Sometimes that's really all a student needs to start engaging, to start practicing on their own. And I think you're really going to see that your scores in your classroom are going to get better. So thank you for joining me today on my podcast, Dyscalculia in the Classroom. My name is Betsy C., and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great day.